The Russo estate smelled of lemon oil, imported leather and old blood. Nora scrubbed the marble floors until her knuckles cracked, invisible to the men with holstered guns. She wasn't supposed to look at the boss. She definitely wasn't supposed to touch his dying son. The grout in the third-floor master bathroom was a pristine, blinding white, but Nora kept scrubbing. The stiff bristles of her brush scraped against the porcelain, a harsh rhythmic rasp that blocked out the muffled, heavy-bass thumps of the stereo playing 2 floors down. Her knees ached. The damp linoleum seeped cold through her cheap denim jeans, chilling the bone. She dipped the brush into the bucket of diluted bleach. The sharp, chemical sting burned her nostrils, a familiar and grounding scent. It smelled like employment. It smelled like the $300 she needed by Friday to keep her landlord from changing the locks on her cramped apartment. You missed a spot behind the pedestal. Nora didn't look up. She simply shifted her weight, ignoring the sharp twinge in her lower back, and angled the brush to the sliver of tile the nanny was pointing at. Beatrice stood in the doorway, a woman whose crisp navy blue uniform cost more than Nora's entire wardrobe. Beatrice smelled of expensive lavender powder and stale anxiety. She was the head nanny for Leo, Gabriel Russo's 6-year-old son. She was also terrified of her shadow, or more accurately, the shadow cast by the boy's father. "He wet the bed again," Beatrice hissed, her voice a tight, frantic whisper, though no one else was on the floor. "And he spilled something in his bathroom. It's sticky. You need to mop it before Mr. Russo gets back from the docks. If he sees a mess—" "I'll get to it," Nora said, her voice flat. She didn't offer a yes, ma'am. The hierarchy here was strictly financial, and Nora was firmly at the bottom, but she refused to scrape. She stood, her joints popping, and hauled the heavy plastic bucket by its wire handle. She walked down the long carpeted hallway toward the boys' suite. The Russo mansion was a fortress of silent wealth. Silk wallpaper that felt like cold skin. Thick Persian rugs that swallowed the sound of footsteps. It was designed to keep the world out, but it also trapped everything inside. Nora pushed open the heavy oak door to Leo's bathroom. The air inside hit her immediately. It wasn't the smell of a normal 6-year-old's mess. There was a cloying, heavy sweetness hanging in the humid air, like overripe apples left out in the sun to rot. Nora frowned, setting the bucket down. She grabbed her mop and swiped at the clear puddle near the toilet. Her boot stuck to the floor with a soft shk sound. She crouched. Her bare hand touched the edge of the puddle. Sticky. Not just urine, it felt like simple syrup. The fruity, fermented odour grew stronger near the floor. Nora wiped her hand on a rag, her chest tightening with a strange, distant memory. She'd smelled that before, years ago, in a crowded, state-run clinic waiting room, right before the girl sitting next to her went into convulsions. "Leo!" Beatrice's shrill voice echoed from the adjoining bedroom. "Stop drinking that. You'll just wet yourself again, you bad boy." Nora abandoned the mop and stepped to the doorway. The boy sat on the edge of a massive mahogany bed that made him look like a porcelain doll. He was clutching a heavy crystal carafe of water with both trembling hands, gulping it down so fast it spilled over his chin, soaking the collar of his silk pajamas. He didn't look like the heir to a criminal empire. He looked hollowed out. His skin was the colour of skim milk, translucent and stretched too tight over his cheekbones. Shadows, purple like bruised plums, pooled under his dark eyes. He dropped the carafe back onto the silver tray with a loud clatter. He was panting. "I'm thirsty, Bee," he whined. His voice was reedy, thin as paper. "You're always thirsty," Beatrice snapped, snatching the carafe away. "And then you pee on the floor and I have to hide it from your father. Do you want him to think you're weak? Do you want him to send me away?" Leo slumped backward onto the mattress, his small chest heaving. "I'm tired." "You slept for 12 hours, Beatrice retorted, pacing at the foot of the bed. She wrung her hands. "Get up. Your father is coming home soon. You have to look alert." Nora watched from the shadows of the bathroom frame. She squeezed the damp rag in her hands until her knuckles turned white. It wasn't her business. Her rule? The only rule that kept her alive in a house owned by a man who made people disappear for a living was simple. Do not see, do not speak, do not exist. But the boy's breathing was wrong. It was shallow, rapid, like a bird trapped in a shoebox. "He's sick," Nora heard herself say. The words slipped out, gravelly and quiet. Beatrice spun around, her eyes wide with panic and instant fury. "Excuse me? What did you say, you stupid girl?" Nora stepped into the room, her work boots heavy on the plush rug. "I said, he's sick. Look at him. He can barely keep his eyes open. And the smell—" "There is no smell!" Beatrice cut her off, stepping between Nora and the bed, her face flushing an ugly, mottled red. "He's just being difficult. He misses his mother. It's behavioural. The paediatrician said so last month." "Did the paediatrician smell his breath?" Nora asked, her tone shifting from flat to dangerously sharp. "He smells like nail polish remover," Beatrice scoffed, a nervous, jerky sound. "He's eating too much candy, that's all. Go back to your bucket. You don't know anything about this family. If Mr. Russo hears you suggesting his son is flawed, he won't just fire you. He'll put you in the ground. The threat wasn't a metaphor. It was a geographic reality." Nora looked past the nanny's shoulder. Leo had closed his eyes. His breathing was loud in the quiet room. "Hoo! Hoo! Hoo!" Downstairs, the heavy front doors slammed shut. The sound vibrated up the walls. Beatrice gasped, abandoning Nora to rush to the bed. "He's here! Leo, sit up! Sit up right now!" She yanked the boy by the arm. Leo let out a weak whimper, his head lolling on his neck before he forced his eyes open. Nora backed away, retreating into the bathroom. She grabbed her mop handle, gripping the cheap plastic until it bowed. She watched through the crack in the door as Gabriel Russo walked into the suite. He brought the winter air in with him. Gabriel was a man carved from granite and old money. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that fit perfectly over broad shoulders, but it was the quiet way he moved that terrified people. He didn't stomp. He glided, a predator inspecting his cage. He smelled of cold wind, expensive bergamot, and the faint, bitter tang of cigar smoke. "Gabriel, sir," Beatrice stammered, smoothing her skirt. "Welcome home." Gabriel didn't look at the nanny. His dark, heavy-lidded eyes fixed instantly on his son. He walked to the edge of the bed. He reached out a large hand, a gold signet ring flashing in the lamplight, and tipped Leo's chin up. "You look pale, Leoncino," Gabriel murmured. His voice was a deep baritone, a low rumble that vibrated against the floorboards. "I'm okay, Papa," Leo whispered. The boy tried to smile, but it looked like a grimace. "He's been a bit lethargic today, sir," Beatrice interjected quickly, her voice trembling. "Growing pains, I imagine. He's been eating well." A lie. Nora had cleared his untouched dinner trays for 3 days straight. Gabriel's thumb brushed his son's cheek. For a fractured second, Nora saw something in the mob boss's eyes, a flicker of deep, paralyzing terror. It was gone before it fully materialized, replaced by a cold, hardened shell. Gabriel Russo could not afford weakness. Not in his men, not in himself, and certainly not in his only heir. "Russo is not lethargic," Gabriel said, the warmth draining from his voice. He dropped his hand. "Get him dressed. I have associates arriving in an hour for dinner. I expect him downstairs to say hello. No whining." "Yes, sir," Beatrice breathed. Gabriel turned on his heel and walked out. He never even glanced at the bathroom door. Nora stood perfectly still. She looked at the sticky rag in her hand. She thought about her rent. She thought about the cold street. "Not my problem," she told herself, tossing the rag into the bucket with a wet slap. "Not my blood, not my problem." A week passed. The rot in the house deepened. The estate was a hive of frantic energy. Tonight was a sit-down, a gathering of the regional syndicate captains. The air on the first floor was thick with the smell of roasting garlic, expensive red wine, and the underlying tension of 30 armed men in tailored suits trying not to kill each other. Nora had been banished to the second floor. Her orders were simple: stay out of sight, empty the upstairs ashtrays, and keep the guest bathrooms pristine. She wore a grey, shapeless uniform that made her look like the shadow she hid in. As she wiped down a mirror in the hallway bathroom, her reflection stared back at her. Dark circles bruised the skin under her eyes. Her brown hair was yanked into a brutal, messy knot. She looked exhausted. She felt older than 24. Clatter. Nora paused, the damp microfiber cloth hovering over the glass. The sound came from the library down the hall. She shouldn't investigate. She should polish the faucet. But the silence that followed the clatter was heavy, wrong. She left the bathroom, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the runner. The library door was ajar. A sliver of warm, golden light spilled out onto the dark wood floor. Nora pushed the heavy oak door open just an inch more. The library smelled of old paper and leather bindings, but beneath it, punching through the dust, was that terrible, cloying scent. Acetone, nail polish remover, overripe fruit fermenting in a sealed jar. Leo was on the floor behind a massive leather Chesterfield sofa. He was curled into a tight ball, his knees tucked to his chest. Beside him, a heavy crystal tumbler lay on its side, a pool of dark, sticky grape juice soaking into the priceless Persian rug. Nora moved before her brain could give her permission. She dropped to her knees beside the boy. "Leo," she whispered, her voice rough. The boy didn't open his eyes. His skin was drenched in sweat, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, but his skin wasn't hot. When Nora touched his cheek, it was clammy, cold like a fish out of water. His chest was heaving. He was taking huge, gasping breaths, deep and unnaturally fast. Kussmaul breathing. The term floated up from the murky depths of Nora's memory. Her sister's old biology textbook. "Leo? Hey! Kid! Look at me!" Nora patted his cheek, harder this time. His eyelids fluttered. The whites of his eyes were visible, his pupils rolling lazily. "Papa," he slurred. "No, not Papa. Just Nora. The cleaning girl," she muttered, panic finally starting to claw at her throat. She grabbed his wrist. His pulse was a frantic, thread-like flutter against her calloused thumb. The door to the library swung wide open. "What are you doing to him?" Beatrice stood in the doorway holding a silver tray with a plate of cookies. The nanny dropped the tray. The ceramic plate shattered, cookies scattering across the floorboards. She rushed forward, grabbing Nora by the shoulder and shoving her backward. Nora hit the edge of the coffee table, a sharp pain radiating up her spine. She scrambled to her feet, her hands curled into fists. "Don't touch me," Nora snarled. "Look at him. He's barely conscious." Beatrice dropped to her knees, pulling Leo into her lap. "He's just tired. The noise downstairs is upsetting him. I gave him some juice to bring his blood sugar up." "You gave him juice?" Nora's voice cracked. She pointed at the purple stain on the rug. "Are you insane? Smell his breath. He doesn't need sugar, he needs a hospital. His body's poisoning him." "Be quiet!" Beatrice hissed, looking terrified toward the open door. The faint sound of masculine laughter echoed up the grand staircase. "Mr. Russo is hosting the Rossi brothers tonight. If I interrupt him, if I tell him his son is weak enough to need a hospital, he'll fire me, he'll replace me." "He's going to replace you with a coffin if that kid dies on your watch," Nora shot back, her chest heaving. The sheer, suffocating ignorance of it all made her want to scream. These people had millions. They had marble floors and private jets, and they were letting a child die because they were too scared to admit he was human. He won't die. He just needs sleep. Beatrice hoisted Leo up. The boy was dead weight, his head lolling backward. "I'm putting him to bed. If you say one word to anyone, I will tell Mr. Russo you were stealing from his office. Who do you think he'll believe? The head nanny or a ghetto trash maid?" Nora froze. The threat slammed into her chest like a physical blow. She needed this job. She needed the money for her mother's care facility. If she got fired, her mother would be out on the street by the end of the month. If Gabrielle Russo thought she was a thief, she wouldn't just be fired. She'd be lucky to leave the estate with her fingers intact. Nora looked at Leo. The boy's lips were cracked and bleeding. He looked incredibly small in Beatrice's desperate tight grip. "Walk away!" her survival instinct screamed. "Shut your mouth, pick up your cloth and clean the glass." Nora slowly backed away from the sofa. She didn't say a word as Beatrice struggled to carry the limp child out of the library. Nora stood alone in the quiet room. She looked at the spilled juice. She bent down, grabbed her rag and started to scrub the stain. The purple dye fought her, clinging to the expensive wool fibres. She scrubbed harder, tears of sheer frustration and guilt burning the corners of her eyes. She hated Beatrice. She hated Gabrielle Rousseau. Most of all, she hated herself. By 11 p.m, the party downstairs had reached a dangerous crescendo. The polite murmurs had evolved into loud, aggressive debates over territory and margins. The smell of expensive cigars had permeated the floorboards, drifting up to the second level in hazy grey ribbons. Nora was supposed to clock out at midnight. She was currently hiding in the linen closet, counting the stacks of Egyptian cotton towels just to keep her hands busy. She couldn't get the sound of Leo's gasping breaths out of her head. Hoo, hoo, hoo. It was a rhythm that beat against the inside of her skull. She closed her eyes, leaning the back of her head against the cool plaster wall. "Mind your business," she whispered to the empty closet. But what if he didn't wake up tomorrow? What if she came into work and found a black wreath on the door? Could she look at her mother and know that the money paying for her bed was soaked in a 6-year-old's blood? Nora cursed, a foul, guttural sound. She threw a towel onto the floor, kicked the closet door open and marched down the hall. She didn't knock on the door to Leo's suite. She turned the brass handle and shoved it open. The room was pitch black, save for a single, dim nightlight in the shape of a star plugged into the wall. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight. "Beatrice!" Nora kept her voice low. No answer. Nora felt along the wall and flicked the light switch. The chandelier above blazed to life. The room was a disaster. The bed sheets were torn off and thrown onto the floor. In the centre of the room, Beatrice was on her knees. The nanny was hyperventilating, tears streaming down her perfectly powdered face. She was trying to force Leo's limp arms into a stiff velvet suit jacket. Leo wasn't moving. Nora sprinted across the room. She dropped to her knees, sliding on the silk rug, and shoved Beatrice so hard the woman toppled over with a shriek. Nora grabbed Leo's shoulders. His skin was freezing. It felt like touching wet clay. His head fell back, his mouth hanging open. The smell of acetone was so thick it made Nora gag. He wasn't panting anymore. His breaths were terribly shallow, spaced out by agonizing seconds of silence. "He won't wake up," Beatrice sobbed, crawling backward. "I tried to wake him up. Mr. Rousseau wants him downstairs for dessert. I tried." "He's in a coma, you stupid bitch," Nora roared, her voice shattering the quiet of the upper floor. She grabbed the collar of Leo's pajama shirt and ripped it open, feeling for a heartbeat. It was racing, a frantic, irregular rabbit kick against his ribs. His body was shutting down. Acid was burning through his veins, eating his organs. "Call an ambulance," Nora ordered, her head snapping toward Beatrice. "I can't," Beatrice wailed, pulling at her own hair. "The phones are locked down during sit-downs, and if an ambulance pulls up to the gates with the Rossi family inside, there will be a shootout. Mr. Rousseau will kill me." Nora looked down at the boy. His lips were turning blue. She had no medical gear, no insulin, no IV bags. But she had seen this before. "We have to get the boss," Nora said. She stood up, her knees cracking. "No!" Beatrice scrambled forward, grabbing Nora's ankle. "You can't go down there. They have guns. They're drinking. You'll get us both killed." Nora looked down at the woman's manicured hand gripping her cheap jeans. With a cold, terrifying calm, Nora kicked backward, her heavy boot connecting solidly with Beatrice's shoulder. The nanny cried out, letting go. "Stay here," Nora snarled. "Keep his head tilted back. If he throws up, turn him on his side so he doesn't choke. Do it, or I swear to God I'll kill you myself." Nora turned and ran. She didn't run like a maid. She ran like someone running from a burning building. She tore out of the suite down the long hallway, her heavy boots pounding against the floorboards. She reached the top of the grand sweeping staircase. Down below, the foyer was a sea of dark suits. The double doors to the dining room were open. Inside, Gabriel Russo sat at the head of a massive mahogany table, flanked by men with scarred faces and cold eyes. 2 men in sharp black suits stood at the bottom of the stairs. Guards. Nora didn't hesitate. She took the stairs 2 at a time. The guards noticed her instantly. A woman in a maid's uniform charging like a bull wasn't on the guest list. "Hey!" the larger guard barked, stepping forward, his hand dropping casually to the bulge under his jacket. "Upstairs. Now." Nora didn't stop. She barreled straight into him. She had no leverage, but she had desperation. She shoved both hands against his chest, trying to slip past him. "Whoa, crazy bitch," the second guard growled, grabbing Nora by the back of her uniform. He yanked her backward. Nora's feet left the ground. She crashed hard onto the marble floor of the foyer, the breath exploding from her lungs in a harsh wheeze. Pain flared in her hip. The noise caught the attention of the dining room. The low hum of conversation stopped dead. Silence, thick and menacing, rolled out of the room. Nora scrambled onto her hands and knees, gasping for air. The guard stood over her, drawing a heavy black pistol from his shoulder holster. He pointed it down at her face. "You got 3 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't put a hole in your floor-scrubbing head," the guard whispered. Footsteps approached from the dining room, slow, measured. "Put the gun away, Paulie." Gabriel Russo stepped into the foyer. He held a crystal glass of amber liquor in one hand. His face was an unreadable mask, but the tension in his jaw screamed murder. He looked down at Nora, his dark eyes stripping her bare, analysing her threat level and finding nothing but a bruised girl in a cheap uniform. "You work for me," Gabriel said softly. It wasn't a question. Nora stared up at the barrel of the gun, then shifted her gaze to the mob boss. Her heart was hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through. She was terrified. She was shaking. But the image of Leo's blue lips flashed behind her eyes. "Your son is dying," Nora gasped, her voice raw. The crystal glass in Gabriel's hand shattered. He gripped it so hard the thick glass exploded, amber liquor and blood showering onto the marble floor. Gabriel didn't flinch. "What did you say?" Gabriel's voice was barely a whisper, yet it echoed louder than a gunshot. "Upstairs," Nora croaked, pointing a shaking finger toward the landing. "He's not breathing right. He smells like acetone. He's in a diabetic coma. If you don't get a doctor right now, he's going to die in your house." The men in the dining room stood up. Chairs scraped violently against the floor. Gabriel looked at her for one fraction of a second, analysing the truth in her wild, desperate eyes. Then he moved. He didn't run. He erupted. Gabriel shoved the armed guard out of the way with such force the man crashed into an end table. The mob boss took the stairs 3 at a time, his bloody hand leaving smeared red prints on the polished oak banister. "Get the doc!" Paulie screamed into a radio on his lapel. "Get Doc Rossi on the line right fucking now!" Nora stayed on the floor, the cold marble pressed against her bruised cheek. She squeezed her eyes shut. She had crossed the line. She had broken the only rule. She had made herself visible to the wolves. If he dies, Nora thought, her chest tight with dread. I'm dead too. She forced herself up. Her hips screamed in protest, but she limped toward the stairs. She couldn't leave him alone with them. She had to see it through. The climb up the grand staircase took an eternity. Nora dragged her right leg, her hip throbbing with a dull, sickening heat where she'd hit the marble. The heavy, suffocating silence of the house had been violently ruptured. Shouts echoed from the foyer below as Gabriel's men scrambled to lock down the perimeter and locate the syndicate's private physician. But up here, on the 3rd floor, there was only the terrible, ragged sound of Gabriel Russo begging. Nora reached the doorway of Leo's suite. She leaned against the doorframe, her chest heaving, wiping a smear of cold sweat from her forehead with the back of her dirty sleeve. Gabriel was on his knees, the terrifying syndicate boss, A man who commanded legions with a flick of his wrist was hunched over the ruined bed. He cradled Leo's head in his hands. Blood from his deeply lacerated palm smeared across the boy's pale cheek, a shocking, violent crimson against the sickly white skin. Gabriel didn't seem to notice his own torn flesh. He was entirely focused on the blue tint of his son's lips. "Stay with me, Leo. Breathe. Come on. Breathe," Gabriel chanted, his voice stripped of its deep baritone timbre. It was a raw, frantic rasp. Beatrice was backed into the farthest corner of the room, her hands clamped over her mouth, violently trembling. She looked like a cornered rat. Footsteps thundered down the hallway behind Nora. She shrank back against the wall as an older man with a shock of white hair and a rumpled suit rushed past her, clutching a heavy leather medical bag. Doc Rossi smelled of stale scotch and peppermint, but his eyes were stone-cold sober. "Move, Gabriel, let me see him," Rossi barked, shoving the mob boss aside with a familiarity that would have gotten any other man shot in the head. Gabriel stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the mahogany dresser. He stood there, his chest rising and falling in erratic jerks, watching as the doctor tore the velvet jacket the rest of the way off the boy. Rossi didn't waste time checking a pulse. He leaned his face close to Leo's mouth, inhaling sharply. He swore a vicious Italian curse that cut through the humid air of the room. "Ketoacidosis," Rossi snapped, throwing his bag open onto the mattress. Vials clinked together. He's swimming in battery acid. His blood sugar must be over 600. How long has he been lethargic? How long has he been drinking water like a camel? Gabriel didn't answer. He turned his head, his dark, bloodshot eyes locking onto Beatrice. The temperature in the room plummeted. I didn't," Beatrice stammered, pressing her spine against the silk wallpaper as if trying to merge with it. "He was just tired, sir. I gave him some juice. He was just—" "You gave him sugar?" Rossi yelled, looking up from the IV needle he was unwrapping. "Christ, woman, you practically handed him a loaded gun. I need a line in his arm now. Gabriel, hold his shoulder down. He might seize when the fluid hits his system." Gabriel didn't move toward the bed. He took a slow, deliberate step toward Beatrice. The sheer, radiating violence coming off him made Nora's stomach physically turn. "You hid this," Gabriel whispered. His voice was no longer frantic. It was a dead, hollow sound. "You watched my son rot from the inside out, and you dressed him in a suit to hide it." "I was afraid!" Beatrice shrieked, dropping to her knees. "You told me he had to be perfect. You said no weakness. I didn't know he was dying, I swear to God." "Get her out of my sight," Gabriel said to the empty doorway. Poorly, the guard who had shoved Nora materialized from the hall. His face was pale. He grabbed Beatrice by the back of her hair and her collar, dragging her thrashing, screaming body out of the room. Her shrieks faded down the back stairwell, abruptly cut short by the heavy slam of a steel door. Nora didn't want to think about what was behind that door. She forced her eyes back to the bed. "Gabriel, I need hands," Rossi barked. Gabriel was staring at the doorway, paralyzed by a mixture of rage and profound guilt. He wasn't a father in that moment. He was a killer who had just realized his own reputation had poisoned his home. Nora didn't think. She pushed off the door frame, limping across the room. She dropped to her knees beside the bed, opposite the doctor. "I've got him," Nora said, her voice gravelly but steady. She placed her hands on Leo's frail shoulders, pinning him flat against the mattress. His skin was freezing, coated in a greasy sheen of sweat. Rossi didn't question her. He found a vein in the boy's thin arm, sliding the needle in with practiced precision. He taped it down, hooking up a bag of saline and a small syringe of clear insulin. "Hold him tight," Rossi muttered, pushing the plunger. Seconds ticked by. The only sounds in the room were the hiss of the air conditioning and the wet, struggling intake of Leo's breath. And then the boy's back arched. A violent tremor ripped through his small frame. "Got you," Nora grunted, leaning her upper body weight over his chest. "I got you, kid. You're okay." She didn't look at Gabriel, who had finally moved to the foot of the bed. She focused purely on the smell of a rubbing alcohol and the rapid beating of the pulse at the base of Leo's throat. Slowly, Agonizingly, the violent shuddering stopped. The erratic, gasping breaths began to smooth out. Shifted into something quieter, something deeper. His pressure is stabilizing, Rossi exhaled, running a hand through his white hair. He slumped against the headboard. Another 30 minutes, Gabriel, and you would have been planning a funeral. His organs were shutting down. Gabriel braced both his hands on the footboard of the bed. His knuckles were white. The blood from his sliced palm dripped onto the carpet, a steady rhythmic tap, tap, tap. Nora slowly released her grip on the boy. Her arms were shaking from the adrenaline dump. She stood up, her joints screaming, and backed away from the bed. She had done her part. The invisible girl needed to disappear again before the wolves remembered she was in the room. Without a word, she turned and limped out the door into the dark hallway. It was 4 a.m. The mansion was completely silent. The syndicate bosses had been quietly ushered out the back gates hours ago. The remnants of the lavish dinner, half-empty wine glasses, cold cuts of cured meats, sat abandoned on the dining table. Nora sat on a hard wooden stool in the cavernous industrial kitchen. The harsh fluorescent lights hummed above her. She had her cheap canvas duffel bag zipped up and resting on her lap. Her grey uniform was stained with bleach, sweat, and a few drops of Leo's blood. She was waiting for the sun to rise so she could walk to the bus stop. She was waiting to be fired, or worse, punished for laying her hands on a Maid man in the foyer. She stared at the bruised knuckles of her right hand, feeling a strange, hollow sense of peace. She was probably going to lose her apartment. Her mother would likely be evicted from the care home, but Leo was breathing. The heavy swing doors of the kitchen pushed open. Nora stiffened, gripping the straps of her bag. Gabriel walked in. He had discarded his suit jacket and tie. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up past his elbows. A thick white bandage was wrapped clumsily around his right palm. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes carved deep into his face. He didn't look like a mob boss right now. He looked like a man who had survived a car crash. He walked over to the stainless steel refrigerator, pulled out a bottle of cold water and twisted the cap off. He took a long drink, his throat working. Then he turned and leaned against the counter, looking across the vast expanse of the kitchen at her. He didn't speak. He just watched her. Nora met his gaze. She was too tired to lower her eyes. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only a bitter, cynical exhaustion. "He's asleep," Gabriel finally said. His voice was rough, scraping against the quiet room. "Rossi says he'll need a week in bed, and insulin shots for the rest of his life. Type 1. His pancreas just stopped making it." "I know what it is," Nora said softly. Gabriel tilted his head. "How? You're a maid." "Beatrice went to a fancy nursing college in Boston, and she let him rot. You took one look at him and knew." Nora looked down at her hands. "My older sister. When we were kids, she got the flu. Then she got thirsty. Then she stopped waking up. We didn't have money for a private doctor like Rossi. By the time the free clinic figured it out, her brain had swelled." Nora swallowed the lump of old, calcified grief in her throat. "She died smelling like rotting apples. You don't forget that smell." Silence stretched between them, heavy and loaded. The refrigerator hummed. Gabriel looked down at his bandaged hand, tracing the edge of the gauze with his thumb. "My men tell me you tackled an armed guard. You shoved poorly, took a gun in the face, and told me my house was a graveyard." "I didn't want to watch another kid die," Nora said. She pulled the duffel bag tighter against her chest. "I'll leave my uniform in the locker. You don't have to pay me for this week. Just let me walk out the front gate." Gabriel let out a low, humorless exhale. It wasn't quite a laugh. He pushed off the counter and closed the distance between them. Nora tensed, but she didn't shrink away. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. Up close, she could smell the bergamot, the faint trace of old cigar smoke, and the sharp scent of the antiseptic on his hand. "I run an empire built on loyalty, Nora," Gabriel said, his voice dropping low, a vibration she could feel in her chest. "My captains swear blood oaths to me. My guards are paid 6 figures a year to protect my blood, and tonight, every single one of them was willing to let my son slip into a coma because they were too terrified of my temper to knock on a door. He leaned in slightly. His dark eyes searched her face, mapping the bruised skin on her cheek, the exhaustion in her posture. You were the only person in this house who wasn't afraid of me, he murmured. I was terrified of you, Nora corrected him, her voice trembling slightly. I still am. But you moved anyway, Gabriel countered softly. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a thick, folded piece of heavy cardstock. He dropped it onto the top of her duffel bag. Nora looked down. It was a brochure for the Sunny Pines Care Facility, her mother's nursing home. Nora's breath hitched. Her head snapped up. How do you? I background check everyone who scrubs my floors, Gabriel stated, a dangerous edge returning to his tone. I know you're 3 months behind on your mother's bills. I know you skip meals so she can have private physical therapy. The debt is cleared. The facility has been paid in full for the next 10 years, under an anonymous trust. Nora stared at him, her heart slamming violently against her ribs. The relief was instantaneous and crushing, but it was immediately swallowed by a dark, cold realization. Gabriel Rousseau didn't give gifts. He made investments. Why? She whispered. Because you're done scrubbing floors, Gabriel said, his eyes locking onto hers with a possessive, heavy intensity that made the breath catch in her throat. Beatrice is gone. Leo needs someone who actually sees him. Someone who isn't blinded by the money or paralyzed by the gun. He needs someone ruthless enough to kick down my door when I'm wrong. Nora's grip on her bag tightened until her knuckles went numb. You want me to be his nanny? I want you to be his protector, Gabriel corrected, stepping back. The space between them cooled instantly. You belong to this family now, Nora. You don't walk out the front gate. You move into the suite next to his. You eat at my table. He turned toward the kitchen doors, pausing with his hand on the swinging wood. He looked back at her over his broad shoulder. You saved his life tonight, Gabriel said quietly. But make no mistake, your life belongs to me now. The doors swung shut, leaving Nora alone in the harsh light. She sat on the stool, staring at the brochure on her lap. The debt was paid. The boy was safe. But as she listened to Gabriel's heavy footsteps fading down the marble hallway, she realized she hadn't escaped the trap. She had just been moved to a much more dangerous, beautiful cage. If this intense finale left you speechless, hit that like button and subscribe right now. This dark romance is just getting started. What do you think Gabriel will do next? Will Nora survive his world? Drop a comment below with your theories, share this with a friend who loves Mafia drama, and ring that bell for more stories.